Would you like to reach our film and TV review podcast audience? Do you have a product or service of interest to film and TV home consumers or followers of the entertainment industry? Have a film or show production to publicize? For affordable price plans for all budgets, get in touch and find out about our introductory advertising options. Reach our audience of film and TV viewers and visit our site contact page at filmandtvreview.com, or you can email us at business@filmandtvreview.com. Reach out today. Welcome to filmandtvreview.com. Catch the latest film, TV and streamed show reviews every week. The views and opinions expressed by the authors and those providing comments are theirs alone. They do not reflect the views, opinions or position of filmandtvreview.com or their respective parent companies or affiliates. Filmandtvreview.com makes no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information in this program and is for entertainment purposes only. Episodes may contain adult humor and language. For full terms and conditions, see filmandtvreview.com.
Hello there, and welcome to our film and TV review special of the 1979 movie Alien, a deserved classic. We're really standing on the edge of a 45th anniversary this year, and it's got kind of the status as one of those science fiction trademark classics, but it is kind of like one of Ridley Scott's earliest films, and it's more, you could almost say, a haunted house movie, but stirring so many sequels, and it's influenced so many facets of filmmaking since. I thought it'd be a good idea to talk with my regular host, James, this evening. So, James, do you think Alien then is deserving of its title as a classic? And when did you first discover? I mean, I'm guessing you are a fan. But where did you first discover Alien in your viewing experience?
Yeah, I mean, it is sort of in my top three favourite films of all time. I sort of consider it one of the holy trinity of sort of grown-up sci-fi or dark sci-fi. And I think really, I mean, I was always aware of Sigourney Weaver through Ghostbusters, sort of since being a child. And then I think, although maybe I knew about the Aliens films, it was when Alien 3 was coming out. There's a lot of people always talk about like cartoons in the 80s that were aimed at children from franchises that maybe they shouldn't have been watching. But I think for me, it wasn't action figures or anything like that. It was the video games. So there was a lot of video games released around the time of Alien 3. There was an arcade game called Alien 3 The Gun, where you actually picked off the aliens. And there was like a platform game on the Mega Drive, I think. But my other recollection is going into video shops and seeing the Alien and Aliens videos on VHS, and you'd look at the back, and there were these really strange creatures on there that you couldn't really even imagine how they moved. They just looked so unnatural, so unhuman. That they were really sort of, it was one of those films where I was like, that looks interesting, but I wasn't a big horror fan at the time. So I was like, I don't know if it's going to be too scary for me. And I was probably renting RoboCop for the 500th time anyway. But eventually I watched them probably when I was like 12 or 13, and they were on ITV. So Alien was on Saturday, and I just thought it was absolutely amazing. Just the whole world, the whole sort of lived in aesthetic of it. And then at the end they said, and next week is Aliens, and I sort of watched that. I can't remember if it went into Alien 3 or if that we had to wait for that to get the premiere later in the year. But I certainly watched them all quite close together. And yeah, I was just hugely hooked since then. But what
Yeah,
about you? What was your
I think
first?
it's I think I did this in stages. I think it's when it came onto TV, but I was, pretty much a small kid, and it's you maybe watch it a bit 5 minutes and think, okay, well, yeah, that's enough, and then you wait until maybe a year later or 2 years later, think, okay, I'm pretty, yeah, let's give this a go again, and then you look at it, and then, oh no, I can't get to that. I think it's one of those movies, and probably it's designed like that, where you think you see more than you really do, because this is a film that is let's say it's a haunted house story almost, but it's set on a ship with an isolated crew, and this horror or monster or alien is at the edge of darkness everywhere. But you kind of tend to do most of the work yourself in imagining how it is. Um, Part basically, yeah, probably due credit due to Ridley Scott, who's I think this was one of his maybe almost second movie motion picture. He started as in adverts. I mean, huge amount of work in adverts and pop videos, but he really did I think the Duelist before this, but it's quite early in his career, Cons. Because this story is actually it's actually strangely enough, as we had June recently. Like, I think this had its birth basically from maybe a lot of the artists and writers or so forth who were involved in, I think, a very early version of June by another director, Alejandro Jodorowsky, which is, I think there's a documentary actually to catch. Very interesting. But I think what this is the 70s, I think the mid to late 70s, where that was another project, big science fiction project that was trying to get off the ground. And that didn't actually manifest. So I think a lot of these artists who worked on that, bit writers also and so forth, were kind of like kidnapped or taken for this project. I think maybe even Ridley, I think they were trying to push him to do June, but I think it was said it's just too far away. I'm not going to really film somewhere else. I really want something a bit more local.
There were a
Um,
lot of different attempts to get that off the ground, weren't
yeah,
there? June film. So
yeah, yeah. This has a
they'll
long
never they'll
history
never
to
do it.
it.
They'll never do it. Oh, hang
No,
on.
that they'll never. Well, that's another conversation, quite
Yeah,
honestly.
that's another podcast. Yeah.
But I was looking at the writers, and it's Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Susay. But again, a
Mm.
lot of work by other writers. Walter Hill, I think he worked on the Driver, or a lot of kind of like crime dramas and so forth, and David Gilliam. So a lot of people involved in the genesis. It's a very sparse script, apparently, from what I understood, but it's a very lean script as well. But the story is obviously, I don't know those familiar with it. Obviously, like I said, it's a hotel story. Crew of, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 people, and this entity, kind of like it's kind of like a mixture of a body horror. It's always influenced like your thing, the original, the maybe the 1950s version. It's kind of it's a kind of a or Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's kind of like this violation of the body, and all that. But so it's
Apparently,
a very simple premise, though. But
mm,
quite honestly,
apparently that's what Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett. So they're the original writers.
mm,
I think they're the credited writers as well,
yeah,
controversially. So it's their script originally, and I believe they were looking at um, older kind of B movies and seeing what worked, and they probably realistically were thinking, okay, we might not have a lot of money. They probably didn't have any idea in their mind that this film would end up looking as
yeah,
spectacular as it does. Um, and they were thinking, let's do a monster film. Um, and their script was quite. There were a lot of the ideas that come into the final thing, and we'll talk about that maybe with more with the sort of production design. But their initial script, I think Walter Hill, who's also the producer, has sort of said some of it was a little bit wooden and stilted, and they wanted to bring a kind of reality into it, so they rewrote some of it. Um, I think as well that I think this might be a controversial who come up with this, but I think the Walter Hill and David Gillier say that they said, well, let's sort of say any two of the cast could be female, because in the original script
Yeah.
I think it was just six guys, and probably six white guys as well, and they cast Japhet Kotto in there as well. So they sort of made it a bit more of a progressive, diverse cast, which it was a way of sort of going, look, this is a few. Although this is made in the 70s, we're thinking this is probably set in the future. I have read over the years when this film is meant to be set, but it's not explicit in the film. And I think whenever you're watching it, it's just meant to be in about 100 years' time, isn't it? Would you say? Have you got an
Yeah, I
idea of
mean,
when it's set?
I'd say because of the look of it, it's deliberately it's supposed to be, truckers in space. It's where it's almost noticeable emblems. Obviously, you think, oh, is this NASA? Is this, it's very, it's just overalls basically, and it's very grimy. People smoking or coffee and all that. It feels like it happened now in a oil refinery somewhere, and kind of helps in its not being too fantastical. It's probably as grounded as you can be given this genre. Honestly.
And
Um,
also avoids that thing of if you want to set something in the near future. I always remember watching Demolition Man, and by the time I saw it on VHS, it was already set in the past. And you go, this is very silly. They should have said it was 10 years in the future if they really wanted to date it. Um, but I have got in my little notes here. So somebody has said that Alien is set in 2122. I have no idea if that's true. And the video game Alien Isolation is set in 2137, but and
yeah, I
that's still a long time in our future, you know.
well,
Um,
considering this is 1979, where you've probably, I mean, this was really probably put in accelerated to production because obviously we'd had another big, huge hit. Star Wars had come out in 1977. All studios were looking, okay, where's our version of Star Wars? Let's
yeah,
push it out. This script was, I guess, floating around. And as like you said, it really kind of almost felt designed almost like for a Roger Corman production, almost where it's a very small script you can done. And I think from what I read, reading around this, that it could be done very cheaply. And they weren't that ambitious about how big it was. I think they almost. I think there is a. I think Daniel Brand was involved in Star Beast with John Carpenter,
mm,
one of the early
yeah.
student films, and then make it to a feature. So, it is almost a serious version of that movie. So yeah, its roots are kind of like the more cheaper end of the B movie kind of thing. But that
And,
changed hugely.
and I
And I
think you're right. After Star Wars, there would have just been an appetite to have something looking as big as this, and also 2001. I think you've got to
oh
think
yes, of
that's
course, yeah,
sort of 10, 11 years before this. So that's although that's definitely the spaceship we see on that is very shiny. It's not very lived in, is it? Um,
no,
but but as well as I mean, there's those are sort of obvious comparisons. And I think everybody talks about them. There's a couple of other things I think because in a way this is sort of a slasher film, but it just
yeah,
happens to be that it's an alien and it's set in space. And the year before this, you've got Halloween, John Carpenter come out. Now I don't think that probably wouldn't have even come out at the time they were shooting. But prior to this, you had and obviously Halloween was the start of a massive kind of explosion of those kind of things, and the VHS thing and that. But before that, you had um, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and apparently Ridley Scott had seen that, and he was quite impressed by just how intense that film was, and the kind of almost documentary style of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre film. But I think as well as those slashers, I mean, we talked about the monster films. Nobody was really making monster films in the 70s, maybe not even in the 60s, because I think they'd become old hat. So you'd just seen so many things where the monster was a man in a rubber suit, which it is in Alien, but it didn't look scary. It just looked awful. And I think people had got to this point where they that's what they thought. And apparently Harry Dean Stanton, who plays Brett in the film, said um, turned it down, saying, "I don't like monster films." And Ridley Scott said, "Well, neither do I, but we're trying to do something that pushes the envelope a bit more." Um, and that's where it's easy to sort of forget how amazing that creature design is by H.R. Giger. But if it wasn't for that, this film, we wouldn't be talking about this film. I don't think it would work. And it's not a film where you can just pinpoint things. I think everybody's on their A game here. When I was really thinking about, the cast and everything, it almost together. But if that alien at the center of it didn't work, if it didn't look as nightmarish and original at the time, this film might have just been one of those other films where what people went, "Oh yeah, I was really tense for an hour, and then the monster turned up and I laughed." And it isn't. When it turns up in its small form and then its large form, it is terrifying. And I think
I
that's such a big part of it, isn't it? H.R. Giger's design, and actually, if you think like the idea of getting him to design the whole world of Dune would have been, I mean, now you could probably do it, but back then it would have been such a huge undertaking to create a world like that. But it was quite astute of them to sort of go, let's get this guy's design and just make it the centerpiece of this movie because it will terrify people. I
well,
think it's
yeah,
really genius.
I think there are some designs still you can find that he did for June, and it is, I think, credit to probably Ridley Scott, who's on his A game here as well. I mean, this is almost straight out of the gate. I mean, he's probably one of the best visualists directors we've ever had. Honestly, one of the best, and it's painstaking lengths he goes to, probably to the chagrin of the producers at the time, because I think he was absolutely. I mean, bringing in artists. I think he kind of. It's very rare, I suppose, where you have a director who's willing to put so much attention to, if it's the lighting, the artist. It's a very collaborative effort. It's involved in, like you said, the production design, which we go into it. But with Ridley, he's bringing together quite a lot of artists, giving them the time, and also him spending the time very involved in, you know, each stage. Because, well, I mean, you talk about the main alien, but it's a very the film itself is almost like an exercise in subversion, because everything doesn't turn out how you maybe have seen 100 times before. It's actually almost the complete opposite. Even if we're talking about the main protagonist, Ellen Ripley, who starts out just as one of the crew, maybe a bit too straight laced and all that, but it's as the and I've got to say the dialogue, which I think is very much a mixture of, which is again a sparse script, but also I think Ridley said, or when I was reading around, he tends to give a lot of backstory to the actors, as in writes it down, and then gives it to them, and they work on it. When he's directing, he doesn't give them that much, maybe almost a lack of direction, which maybe a few actors find a bit frustrating, but they can fill it in. But they're so informed and their own natural bonding conversations. So it's almost like an improv almost. And I think that's why the
Mm.
dialogue doesn't really date so much here. It's like a very natural way of speaking that you would have done 45 years ago, now, maybe in another 45 years. I think it's so important to ground this fantastical film, which is
I think that's the one of the reasons it does stand up so well. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, Aliens, I do think is possibly the best sequel of all time, but there are lines of dialogue that are very kind of cheesy. They're very kind of they never really feel like genuine things that people in the military would say. It feels like things that a screenwriter would think of to put into the mouths of people in the military. And it's very clip, almost like comic book, very short sentences. So when we're talking about sparse dialogue, that's kind of real life, but there's also sparse dialogue, isn't there, that you get in comic books, which is very it's got to fill that speech bubble and it's got to get to the point. And sometimes when that is adapted for the screen, they don't flesh that out enough. There's definitely bits here um that are improvised. I mean, the sort of famous scene that everybody knows is improvised is when I think after Dallas is killed, so there's like four of them left at that point. Um, and Ripley is now the person in command. Because actually, although we said that Sigourney Weaver is the protagonist here, Tom Skerritt is the more known actor at this point.
Yeah.
And he's actually billed top. Although it wasn't one of those films where you had like names above the the poster. But if you look at the blurb at the bottom, it's Tom Skerritt is billed top and then Sigourney Weaver, and they kind of do the Psycho thing of killing off not as early on as Psycho, but the person who you assume is the protagonist dies almost. I think is the sort of middle person to get bumped off. So you kind of go, oh, that kind of throws you a little bit because we're still used to the people surviving. I think by the time I watched this, I knew that Sigourney Weaver was the protagonist because of the sequel. But that was quite a good thing to have thrown in for audiences back in the 70s. I'm quite jealous I wasn't there to sort of soak that up. But going back to the dialogue, there's that scene where that suddenly she's in command and she's trying to get sort of talk to Parker about this, and apparently Yvette Koto was just told to keep ad-libbing and pushing her in that. And so the scene where she snaps and says shut up, and you can't hear what he's saying because he's wandered off of wherever the boom was, and but it gives you that sense that you're watching people fight because you are genuinely watching, and it's a different, so they're not fighting for their lives, but suddenly this actor is being thrown a curveball, and they know. I think actors embrace this stuff because if they're improvising, and if it didn't work, it wouldn't have made the cut. But the fact that they leave that scene in and he keeps trying to talk over her and kind of he's trying to assert his authority over her and she won't let him have that. But it's one of those scenes where it helps with the realism and it helps with the tension of the scene.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes Ridley Scott is criticized for not giving the actors the direction that they want. I mean, it's famously Blade Runner as well, and probably. But I was reading around in this movie as well, so it's interesting his technique. But he kind of like does his homework, gives them huge backstory, and then they work on it so they got an anchor. But then they've developed it so well that they can have these scenes where you are arguing, and they've got their own agenda as a character. And I think there was reading also that he did tell some of the cast members to maybe between takes don't talk to Sigourney Weaver or just keep a distance because and she was quite a young actress there, but she's more theatre trained, and then one of her first like lead roles, honestly. But they kind of just to put her off balance to try and isolate them, so you get this very adversarial kind of tension between her and the rest of the crew, and as you would in a tense situation where you don't know, where you're just suddenly put in charge, and then the rest of the crew are just almost in panic mode, and then people kind of like at their worst, and that's what's just so appealing because there's a lot of, as I say, you've got these huge shocking events, these stages of the alien and horror, but then these are long periods where you've got the crew together, the tension, and I mean we spoke a bit earlier, but it's these this suspension or the suspense where you don't see an alien and you're just waiting for it. It's quite unnerving to watch where those gaps in between. As great as that projection design is, it's kept to a minimum, honestly, and the final one as well is kept to a minimum.
I think one of the things I read that's quite interesting. So we're talking about the HR Giga creature design, and he was sort of involved in designing other aspects of the planet.
Yeah.
Um, Probably the engineer, is that what they call them?
Yeah, the engineer.
Yeah, and
Probably is.
although he apparently he come up with a chest burster, and people didn't like it because it looked a bit like a sort of chicken or something, and people were
Yes.
laughing at the design. So actually, that came more from Ridley Scott himself, apparently, just saying, well, if this is the adult version, let's just work that back and get a smaller version. I think Giga was trying to do a completely different type of
Mm.
creature, which wouldn't really sort of make sense. Although that doesn't necessarily matter. I think sometimes, I think particularly in franchises, people get a little bit bogged down in sense, and sometimes you just need something to freak you out. But obviously, if something jumps through your chest and it looks like a chicken, it might not be as scary as the thing that we get. But in terms of production design, apparently the whole spaceship, they got a different set of designers in for that.
Yes.
So that's different because they said they didn't want any kind of I mean, it'd be pretty weird if their ship looked like the Alien. It's got to be cohesive. It's in the same film, right? But you kind of want it to feel like it's a
I
different
think
environment, so it's a
Ridley
much
was a
more.
big fan when he was doing his research. I mean, he was a big fan of some of the art that was in Heavy Metal magazine at the time, and I think French artist Mobius was. I think he asked to design the Earth crew, their ship. Well, at least I think they're certainly their spacesuits, which look almost like samurai warriors in them. But that distinct look, yeah, different artists on different aspects of this. It's so rich. You know why this kind of film for me does hold up to so much repeat viewing. It is so rich, even if you're not looking at it as a horror movie. It's so well lit or atmospheric. The production, there's always more details that you can see. So when you have a new release, a DVD or Blu-ray release, you think, oh, what have I not seen in
Yeah, I
before?
mean, for a long time, it was a film that I wanted to tick off my bucket list of seeing at the cinema when there were less re-releases.
Yeah,
It's more commonplace, I think now. But so I probably went to see it maybe the year after Prometheus come out, and I was like, finally, I've got to see this film on the big screen. And then it come out for what was probably the 40th anniversary. Um, and I went to see it again, and I thought, oh, why am I coming to see this film again at the cinema? I've already ticked this off the at the cinema list, you know. And it hadn't been that long since I'd maybe seen it on TV or on Blu-ray again. And I sat in the middle of the cinema, and I just the time just flew by because I think seeing that set on a big screen. The first time I saw this would have been on a little square screen. It
yeah.
would have been panned and scanned, obviously with adverts put in the middle of it. And the fact that it is all built practically, it is like just looking around this amazing set, and just it's like being on the Nostromo for 2 hours. And I sort of like, yeah, that is really kind of, it's a real immersive feeling to it, which I
It's
never would have had at home.
it's one of
And I
those
think it,
landmark. Yeah, sorry, it's one of those landmark where you have a practical set. I think even the ship itself was built
yeah,
as a almost like an enclosed room by room, and maybe as a circle, but then which we don't really get so much now anymore. But
yeah. And I think I sort of watched it thinking over the years I come to start, and maybe this is true of new audiences just because of what their expectations are like. But I thought, oh, maybe it's too slow paced now, particularly at the start of this film, that people will struggle to get on board with it. But I think really seeing it at the cinema and seeing it on that bigger screen. I mean, if you've got a great big TV at home, just turn the lights off and put yourself in front of it, and you'll probably have a similar experience. But just looking around that set and being amazed by the amount of production design. Maybe because we've had so many films like this now, we're kind of used to it. So if you're coming to see this film for the first time, you think, oh yeah, well this is the minimum I would expect from a sci-fi film. But at the time, I mean, you did have 2001, but and Star Wars. I mean, actually, they get increasingly dirtier in terms of like their just the sort of world you're in. So 2001, the spaceship was very clean, isn't it? And everything's very
yeah,
clean. And Star Wars, it's starting to look a bit more lived in. and this is even more so because, like you say, this is truckers in space. You get the impression these are all very sort of blue collar,
It
with
invites,
Parker and Brett probably at the bottom of that
yes, the kind of
kind of
hierarchy.
hierarchy as well. Yeah, yeah.
It is because of the amount of production design. I mean, I did read that you know, as you're under a budget, they said, well, why is the space jockey scene necessary? Why not just have a fossil on the ground and just find that and find an egg there? And I think Ridley was one of those who actually thought, no, you've got to have it. I think
Okay.
this is what really put it to the A movie class status compared to a B movie, where B movie you wouldn't bother putting it. But I think it had some long term, probably it seeded the idea of world building. I think it's kind of like now you are in a totally different world, like Star Wars, where you, if you're really on a budget, you just cut some of, like, you cut the cantina scene or whatever it is. But the fact you have it there and it's only glimpse, it's not really adding to. I don't need that much detail. If you go into a bar or you go into a spaceship and you find your eggs, but the fact that you've got there and you don't really go into depth about it, but you just see it visually, and it kind of just adds to its world building. That's
It
why you have
is,
your
yeah.
Prometheus.
It's one of those things. To be honest, I've never. It was one of those things for years. Obviously, in Prometheus, it is expanded upon.
Yeah,
But the idea, I never really used to speak about it. I used to hear people talk about it, but it was one of those things where, well, we don't know the answer, and I kind of like listening to theories on it, and not really knowing what they are. In a practical sense, like you see this sort of creature, and it seems to have had something burst forth from its chest. So that's a little bit of foreshadowing of what's about to come without it being obvious. But I think if it was a human, you would have two problems. One, why are there already other humans here? And two, it's very obvious what's happened. So when they kind of see it's fossilized and they kind of go, oh, it's chest, it looks like something's burst open from the inside. You don't really know the first time you watch it. You're not really sure. I don't know how much you don't kind of go, oh right, well that's going to happen to them necessarily. I think you're kind of more like, who is this fossilized character? Is this going to be relevant
yeah,
later in a bigger way? So it gives you a sense of, I'm talking for myself. I can't say if this is the case for other people, but when I watched it, I was like, is this thing in the background going to become relevant later? But it
yeah.
not in a way where I felt let down by it, because there's another film I can think of where they do that and they never follow it up on something. In this, it feels more like a bit of a wrong footing thing, but also that once you've seen this, you're like, oh, is this going to be, is there another creature going to turn up? Is this and it just looks spectacular to start with.
It is
But you kind of go, it's
spectacular.
really odd
Yeah,
because they've got to get off that ship for a reason, and it's within that there's got to be something worth it. I know we then get to the egg, but you wanna have a reason that they've come off the ship that makes it worth it. If they just come out and there was a load of litter there, you go, well, why have they come off the ship? So it's sort of a primer for what you're about to see, and it really, yeah, it just really sets you on edge. I think the first time it's like, what
because
is this?
yeah, there's a lot of questions that you don't have immediate answers, which we tend to have now, almost in screenwriting now. It's like, well, what is this? Is everyone going to? It's and it's unnerving because you're now deep into some unknown.
The weird thing is
You
it
don't know what you'll
looks
be
a
doing.
bit like an elephant man, not the Elephant Man with John Hurt, but it looks
No,
like an
no,
elephant man. It's got like a
yeah,
long sort of snout thing, isn't it? And and that the fact that it sort of looks like something, but it doesn't really look like anything.
no,
That's really good. It's sort of in this weird ship thing, which it doesn't seem to be riding, it seems to be growing out of. And yeah,
yeah.
you're just
And just
suddenly like, right, I'm in a sort of world now where nothing makes sense. And I think that's really
yeah,
important in terms of, we've been on this ship, which, although it's a fantastical ship, there is something grounded about it. It feels
yeah,
like somewhere where, you know, blue collar manual workers would be working, but in the future. But now you feel like, right, we're in an alien planet, but not a sort of shiny technological planet.
yeah.
We're somewhere really
It's.
odd.
I mean, it is entering. I would say at its core, it's a body horror invasion, right, or contagion story. I think Daniel Bannon actually, I mean, well, coming up the story, was suffering from a chronic digestive problem. I think maybe Crohn's disease, where huge stomach pains when he was ingesting stuff. But so seeds of that story here, but it's there's a huge sex connotation to this whole life cycle of this and a violation in this, which is probably a lot of to do with the horror in this creature, which is because it is such a violation, but and it's very almost sexually aggressive, but with a male in this kind of arc of this story, which unnerves you on a subconscious levels as well.
And
So
Dan
notably,
O'Bannon has said that that was a kind of thought that he had, that a lot of a lot of those slashers, those sort of slasher films, they are a lot of the victims are female a lot of the time. Um, and I mean, we could go into a whole thing about that. That could be a whole podcast in itself. But here they sort of come up with something that I think his phrase was he wanted to he wanted to unnerve the male members of the audience who would usually maybe sit through it in a sort of gazing way at the horror that was going on. This is sort of like it's a bit closer to home
yeah,
for the male audience, that might have had an easy ride with, or an easier ride with the sort of horror films up until that point. So,
yeah,
I mean, a lot has been talked about over the years about it being a sort of like a male birth thing, hasn't it? It almost feels like that's the first thing everybody sort of says about Alien. But yeah, it is just a very. I mean, apparently it comes from them trying to work out the script as well. So I think that the two original writers were trying to find an interesting way for the alien to get on the ship. They didn't want to just get, like they walk back on the ship and then it sneaks through the door and then it's out. They were trying to find something. And then one of them come up with the idea of, hey, what if it impregnates one of them?
yeah,
And I don't think, I mean, the first time I watched it, I didn't know, because we obviously get to the egg scene, don't we?
yeah.
Which I'd seen that parodied on Danger Mouse as a kid, and I didn't understand it. I just thought I was like, okay, there's it, because why would I have, as a 5-year-old, have watched Alien? And years later, I was like, oh my god, that whole sequence is a parody of Alien. Um, but when they
It,
go down and find the egg, I mean, it's very tense, and that it's a practical effect, isn't it? That it's
it's
sort
a
of a
lot of
thing that
animal
I think
offal
they put
apparently.
back into the egg and then
No,
they reverse the footage to make it look really
yeah,
violent.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even when he's slowly opening it, it's almost kind of like kind of flower petal, but it
Hmm.
could have been almost much ruder in the original designs.
Yeah.
But it is,
It look
but
it
it,
looks kind of hypnotic, doesn't it? Because I think
yeah,
you have to kind of believe that John Hurt would be, his curiosity would get the better of him. He seems a smart guy, but
mm,
that he's seeing life that you wouldn't have seen. And there's this thing on the egg where there's like bubbles through the skin of it. You don't really get that in the sequels. I think they're just sort of like non-translucent in the sequels. But you can
it's
see like,
horrifying and beautiful at the same time. So that's why
yeah,
it's very entrancing.
which is what
I
Giger's
mean,
work
luminescent.
is, isn't it? It
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
it's got enough things in it that are familiar to the human psyche, I suppose, things that we're familiar with, but presented in a sort of grotesque way. And I think if it was completely alien, it would just like look completely different from what we're used to. We wouldn't really understand it. But he does things that, I mean, even the alien head itself, it's got a mouth, but it's got another mouth within it, and it's
Yeah.
sort of got this long dome head, and it's. I mean, I never think of the alien as having eyes, but it sort of does if you look close. But that,
Mm,
the thing is, in the original film, is you don't get to see it very close, so you only get to see brief
towards the end.
bursts of it.
Yeah.
Until even at the end, I don't think you really get a great
Not a
look at
full
it.
straight shot. No, I
No,
mean
and
it's
and this is back in the day as well, when you wouldn't have, if you tried to freeze frame a VHS, you can't. There would always be lines to it, so you couldn't get a clear shot of something.
no,
It was
no,
not
but
like now when you can screenshot stuff on your phone,
frame
and
by
you couldn't have
frame.
Googled the image. So the first time I watched it, I was like, "Oh God, that's." I mean, you barely probably see the alien. If you got all the shots of it on screen, it's probably less than a minute in the film. I don't know.
Yeah,
Someone's probably done
it,
that.
it kind of sits in your psyche. That's why you kind of have to. as a kid, you kind of like watch it in bits. Like I think it took 3 goes before I got to the end. As in, I was a really young kid, and then you think, okay, I'll stop now. I think it always, I think always probably the what it was probably where it's now probably a famous scene, but it is obviously when, of course, Kane, John Hurt gets impregnated, but then miraculously rejoins the group. He's feeling fine. Have a nice dinner scene, as in a breakfast, as in before they go to the freezers. And I think you kind of know something's horrible is going to happen when he starts choking. And as a kid, like, okay, maybe I won't do that this year. Maybe when they show it next time on TV. Um, a lot of, I think that kind of like one of those things that puts it on a map. I think definitely with audiences, as in quite a horrific scene. Again, a huge practical effect. But I think, from what I understand, it's what really got these actors on board when I think famously with the chest burster scene, they weren't really aware of how much blood would be coming out on even, I think it was even the second or third attempt where they even aimed maybe a hose at some of the actors and
Yeah.
then sprayed them. And so
Well,
what you get, very purposely orchestrated, that this very shocked response of almost keeling over some of the actors when they got a huge mouthful of blood from that scene, which I think Ridley was actually aiming for, to get something, a shocking response from the actors on that. Apparently, from that point on, then the actors really kind of really understood how terrified you're going to have to be because of the complete shock of it.
And I think I mean, it's a good, it still stands up, I think, as a practical effect, as well as just the horror of what it is. Like, I mean, it's almost like the idea of it is more horrible than the actual movie itself.
Yes.
Just the idea of, and the idea of something coming out of your chest as you're still alive is, and I think everybody's familiar with like spiders and things that lay their eggs in hosts and stuff, and see that with a human. The idea is terrifying, but the performances of the actors, I mean,
Oh yeah.
Poor Veronica Cartwright apparently did get a hose of blood squirted like directly at her. But I think like John Hurt himself, if that performance wasn't as good as it is,
Yeah.
you kind of wouldn't buy the horror of it, and just how concerned and kind of bewildered the rest of the crew are. Because at that point, obviously, the as we call it now, the face hugger has attached itself in the previous couple of scenes, and they've come up with this thing of when they try, like we would all go, let's try and cut it off. They even say a knuckle, don't they? Because it looks like a big hand. Let's cut through a knuckle, and acid comes out and starts to burn through each layer of the ship, and you're like, oh my god, is that if that gets through the last layer of the ship, but the film is over. And someone has the line, "What a great defense mechanism! You daren't kill it," and you suddenly realize, God, this thing it's not indestructible, but these 7 people don't really have a great way of dealing with this, because we are not full of guns yet like we are in the sequels. They're just on board with this thing. So you already know that it's this terrifying beast. There's a great jump scare as well when it jumps out, the skin falls out of the overhead locker onto Sigourney Weaver's shoulder.
Yeah.
Really great jump scare the first time and multiple other times as well, because you sometimes forget it's there. Don't they do something that just before and you think, oh, that's where it is, and then that comes down. It's like the head in Jaws, when the head comes out. That makes people jump every time. You know it's coming. You can't quite remember where in the shot it's coming from.
The sound is great.
But it's kind of like after the facehugger dies, you think, or the crew, we know because we're not that long into the film, but the characters, there's sort of a joyous feeling amongst them that James, he's Kane's joking now that he's hungry and he can't wait to get home, and actually the scene where they're eating. Before that, there is dialogue, but it's barely audible because everybody's talking over each other. That must be improvised as well. So there's some sort of comment Parker says about eating food and eating other things, and you can kind of make out bits of it, but a lot of it you can't really. And it's that very disjointed, realistic dialogue. And I'm sure they just said, "Well, just make this up," and then at some
Yeah.
point, I don't know if John Hurt got a signal. He's like, "Right, that's when you start to do this thing and convulsing." But it you really get the sense of unity amongst them, and there's been a lot of tension since then of I'm trying to think now. Does Ripley
Well, I
lets them
think
back on
the
the
lag.
ship, doesn't she?
Yeah, she
And
kind of.
oh
Well,
no,
Ripley.
no, she
Well, to
doesn't
let
want them back on the ship. Ash lets them back on, and she says he
Ash
can't
lets
come
them
on
in,
because
yeah.
it's
And
contaminated.
she's
So
basically saying, well, you've infected the whole, you don't know what
hmm,
health and safety kind
quarantine
of option of
procedure.
contagion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Um,
she's, I mean, but the kind of
but
like, but
Lambert is
even
not happy
Dallas,
about
now, even Dallas is kind of like saying, look, because of this horrific thing has happened to one of their crew members off board, and instinctively you wanted to take him on board just to see to him. But so she sort of always comes off as the the just the bad guy almost in this. Was what instinctively you'd want someone, but in the long term you see obviously it's the right call, but at that point,
it.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's Dallas who he almost orders from outside when he's off the ship though. But she's actually
it's
in charge
understandable, but
on
it's
his own.
it's an interesting one actually thinking about that because I mean I've seen the film a million times and even I said, "Oh,
Yeah,
Ripley lets him back on," because at that point in the film, yeah, she's almost like the coldest person there, which
yeah, yeah,
maybe that's deliberate in trying to make you think, well, she's not going to be the last person left because she becomes
yeah,
final
yeah,
girl in this, doesn't she?
yeah,
And maybe at that point you're thinking, oh well, she's gonna be picked off soon then, or
yeah,
I more like these other members of the crew. And to be honest, there's time to do that as well, because there's time to find a favorite member of the crew and then for them to get picked off. There's nothing worse in one of these films than someone who you don't care about being picked off. Maybe part of the problem with, or one of the problems with Alien 3, one of the many
I mean, she
problems with
goes through
Alien.
her transformation certainly through the whole script from kind of like, I mean, they're all kind of victims, but then they become survivors, and then I think she becomes almost hunter almost towards the end. But you kind of they're a team. They seem to work organically, and you buy it straight away. This is
Mm.
very quite hard even just to have an idea who the character is in a group ensemble, and it's very tricky for
Yeah.
films.
But you've got,
We have an
like we said,
ensemble
you've got that
cast.
hierarchy within it, and you sort of understand because you see Brett and Parker working together, and they're kind of
Yeah,
engineer,
sure.
different type of engineers, but they're engineers on the ship, and they're kind of
Mechanics,
looking
I'll
after that
say,
stuff.
yeah.
And also they're particularly picking over their pay, so you wonder are they even on the same rate of pay as the other people?
Pay scale.
Because they seem to have more of an issue with whether they're going to get paid or not. There's a scene as well in the so there's two cuts of this film. There is and it's one of these things that I hate that the director's cut is not the director's cut. There was a recut of the film in 2003 by Ridley Scott, which is actually run shorter and has alternative footage in it. And he did as like a favor to 20th Century Fox because they were releasing a box set and they wanted alternative versions of each film. But in that version, Lambert comes on and slaps Sigourney Weaver. She slaps Ripley for not letting them on the crew, which makes it feel a bit more like a sort of episode of like Big Brother or something. Like it feels a bit reality TV rather than classy sci-fi drama. So I understand why they left that out. Um,
Mm.
but it gives you an immediacy of okay, there's a real tension now between some of the people in
Yeah,
there. But you know
it is a
who all their
tension between the
jobs
crew.
are, and Ash is very sort of I mean, I don't know if we go through the cast in order of who gets picked
Well,
off, I suppose.
I suppose. I mean, obviously, I mean, yeah. I mean, speaking of the cast, I mean, I mean, they're great character actors, all of them. I mean, John Hurt, one of the best actors, I think, in his generation, and I think he was obviously a last minute substitution as well. I think the original actor had actually a medical emergency, so actually had to, even though it started filming, then had to be removed, and John Hurt was
I
called
did
in
not know that.
last minute. Yep, last
Mm.
minute, and so all these other actors had actually had a good. They actually had rehearsals, which is the first. I think, which I think Sigourney Weaver said that she hasn't had since, where you have a film where you have rehearsals and then go into the have the scenes later on. But so uh, put it to John Hurt, who, like you said, making these he's very inquisitive, and but you sympathize with him so much. I think just the manner he kind of exudes that even though he's the one who gets infected and comes on board. Um, I think there was a bit of a story that of course, you've got American crew and you've got American actors and English actors, and I think there's slight differences in how they act. I think the Americans tend to be a bit more method. English actors are kind of like more trained. So they were asking, I think, John, well, how are you going to play this scene with a chest burster? How are you going to, act that, or what are you going to draw upon? And he says, well, I'll just use my considerable imagination and just do it. So there is a different modus
The
operandi
other
in
thing
the
is,
acting
I mean,
schools
this
between them.
film, we sort of said like it's truckers in space, but I mean it's a workplace drama in a weird way, isn't it? That
Yes, it
that
is.
in workplaces you are thrown together with people and you have to get on with them. Yeah, or you have to get the
Yeah.
job done. You don't have to get on with them. You have to be sort of civil. Um, and which comes easier to some people than me. I love everybody I work with if anybody's listening to this.
Of course.
Um, but you've got a similar thing here that you've got different actors from different backgrounds being thrown together, and they've just got to get on. So maybe that some of that sort of bled
Yeah,
through
I think it does bleed through
to it.
to it.
But I mean, it is really good casting. That I mean, it's a slightly silly comment this, but that apparently with Alien 3, some of the test audience in America said, "Oh, it's full of bald British guys. I can't tell the difference between any of them." But like here, I mean, this is good casting that you couldn't confuse any of these people with anybody else because just everything about them is so different, you know.
Yeah.
So you could have cast another three crew to get just namelessly slaughtered, but why would you? Because each one of these people is really, really memorable. I mean, even in Aliens, you don't the crew gets cut, or um the sort of military, they get cut down very quickly. But
Yeah.
early on, you don't really know who all those people are. They're there just to
Mm.
sort of give the impression, and it does work. There is a purpose to that. That they're meant to have just suffered these massive sort of losses. That suddenly they've gone in literally all guns blazing, and that firepower is not doing anything, and it's kind of a bit of a Vietnam style wake up call of, oh, this tech isn't really helping. But here, yeah, you've just got these seven people, all very, very different. So you completely know who each one is, and kind of what the role is within the ship as well. You've got like the medical person, you've got the captain, you've got the engineers. Having said that, I can't think what Lambert does now. No offense to her.
It's navigation. I think she's supposed to tell them where
Navigation
they
shit. Yeah,
are.
yes,
She does the
yes.
navigation.
I haven't
So
watched the film
that's
for 5 years, so uh,
well, I mean, watching can you imagine like you've got probably an archetype, you've got Dallas, Tom Skerritt, who's you kind of thinking, oh, the captain. Well, obviously the captain makes it towards the end. He must be the hero, as any
yeah.
1950s sci-fi or any probably sci-fi or ship drama, or whatever it is, up until that point. But then it kind of does this Hitchcockian Dallas. You lose Dallas. I think when you lose Dallas, I think probably audiences then must be thinking, now it's anyone's
I mean,
game.
he's got a classic 70s beard, which is kind of back in now, but it's kind of like this is sort of 10 years after the space race as well, isn't it? When we've sort of landed on the moon. So that was very much sort of probably in people's mind as well. Oh, wouldn't it be great to do, space exploration? This is the other side of it, of like, what if we go and we find a xenomorph thing that wants to lay eggs in our throat? It might not be so
It,
good. So it
it's
kind of
it's
taps into a bit of that. But
it's
I think even with that 70s beard, he feels like the person who, if you were watching the moon landing, you'd believe that he was the guy who did was on, you believe he was Neil Armstrong or something. He's the sort of archetype, isn't he, of that? So he feels like perfectly cast to be the captain and to be the guy who,
wait,
I mean, when he goes down and he goes, I will go, it's got to be
yeah,
me. I'm going to go
it's
down
gotta
into
be.
these shafts with the flamethrower. I'm going to take this thing out. Even though I was tense, I kind of believe that's where the movie's going to end that first time. I was like, okay, he's just going to sort this because he's the man.
He's
He
gonna
knows
sort
what he's
this out.
doing. Like, but there is also that thing of they're not going to kill this guy.
No,
at this
yeah.
point in the movie. No way.
Because I
Like
think
I'm
as
kind of
well.
thinking he's going to get out, and even actually when he goes, and I mean this is another contentious thing because depending on which cut you watch, what I say isn't true.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you kind of go, okay, we're going to bump into him later. Maybe he survives. You know that whole thing of uh in Jaws when the guy who you think's died in the cage comes back later on. You know that sort of thing. Hopper and yeah,
I think probably, yeah, as an audience, I think you're thinking, well, who's going to be my point of view here? Because obviously, or the hero of it, and then he disappears, and you're thinking, okay, I think you naturally want to latch on to who's the next person who's going to be, the
but
protagonist of the
that's
film.
actually why that scene with Parker, the scene that I was saying about Parker and um Ripley
Brett?
having that argument. That's the
Oh,
scene that
Ripley.
comes immediately afterwards when Puck
Yeah.
comes back and says, "We found this gun, no blood, no nothing." You know, and suddenly you are like, "Geez, this is what's happening." Like even this
Yeah.
guy's got picked off,
What
and there is that sense of panic and anxiety that
panic?
they've
Yeah.
got. You're kind of feeling that as a audience member because you're like, "Hang on, that guy shouldn't have died at that point. What's going
Yeah.
on?" Like, and you're, I think at that point you are like who you're left with? You're left with actually Parker is probably the person you're rooting for most at that point, I think. Ripley seems a bit cold. Lambert is kind of she's the Hudson of this film, isn't she? Because she's
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
pieces
She's
at
kind of
this
the
point.
emotional kind of
And
like terror.
Ash, we know
Dependable
something's wrong with
Ash.
Ash. We don't trust Ash, but we don't know what. I don't know whether we should get to
Well,
this now, but like
Well, I think we
the
should. I think eventually,
Ash,
I guess naturally. Well, with
yeah,
Ash, dependable Ash, calm Ash. Although when you watch it, the first thing that is a bit odd is because he's in the when they're on the surface of the planet, and then he's in the cockpit, and then he goes and does a standing run up for some reason, and you think,
yeah,
hmm,
that's a bit odd.
why? Odd.
That's a bit
It's
odd.
kind of like, ugh. So you
And
kind of
it's a
think, hmm,
great, it's a brilliant performance by
yeah,
Ian Holm. But I
yeah,
think when he starts sort of blinking. I think the first thing he starts doing is sort of blinking because she's hit him over the head. He starts sort of like he throttles her, and you just think he's a misogynist person. I try not to swear in this podcast to
yeah.
save
Okay.
you on editing, but
No.
he does, and then he sort of he wraps up a newspaper and sort of
A
rams it into a
magazine,
throat,
and
but he
then
does it in a
puts it.
really like it's a newspaper like but he tries to wrap it like he's trying to twist iron and you go what's wrong with this guy, then when he jams it into her throat he starts blinking, then I think he starts like spinning round and spitting milk, and I remember at that point going I have no idea what's going on here. I think at
We,
that point I thought he was infected. The
yeah, of
first time I ever
course.
watched it I
You
was
would
like
think it's an
he's
alien.
infected
Yeah.
with something from experimenting on the alien. We're going to find out what. And then Parker comes in, hits him over the head with a metal pole, and his head comes clean off. And
Oh,
you go, what
what
is
is going on
going on?
now?
And actually,
It's
this is maybe the one part of the film. I think because you're so into it by this point, you don't care. And now I think I know it's coming, but this is the effect that maybe doesn't look the best in the film.
mm,
Is that fair to
yeah.
say?
I think it
Yeah.
suffers a bit from the just the head and maybe when they burn it off. But I think up until then, it's kind of like you always feel that he's almost hiding something. Is this kind of like this pointing fingers? He's like, you is he helping them? Is he not? And then it's he's a bit well, he's just being very British. If you're English, you think, yeah, he's just being normal. Well,
Yeah.
this is what we're like. But then,
British person.
yeah, we're not
The
going to
ship.
talk
I don't
about
think is he the only British
what we
cast member?
found. We're
Okay.
collating information. That's all you need to know. Yeah. So
Okay.
if you're Brit, you understand. But Americans, I guess, it's very frustrating. Saying, well,
I
tell
mean,
me what.
we've jumped ahead to Ash. Actually, we've missed Brett off. Actually, haven't we? Who's the first person
We
to get
missed, yeah,
picked
the
off?
first person, yeah,
So he goes, and I mean, there's someone else missing on that picture behind you, but who we'll mention soon. I don't know if you can guess who that is.
well, Jones, the cat.
Jones is missing.
Wow,
Although
the
maybe
hero.
you're just maybe he's down there. I don't know.
Oh,
But
yeah,
that scene of him sort of walking on his own. I mean, it goes on for quite a long time, but in a
long
brilliant
time.
way.
Yeah,
Like because you know it's coming, you know
yeah,
something's coming, but you're not prepared for how quickly this thing has grown. Because this is the first time, and actually maybe the sort of best time that you get a full on shot until the end of the film as it sort of
Yeah.
stands up in its glory. It sort of there's that brilliant shot as he bends over to or sort of bends down towards Jonesy, and then it appears behind him, but it's
Yeah,
kind of
behind him.
blurred.
Yeah.
We've got his face in focus,
We
and I think particularly when it used to be on a cropped square screen on TV, you didn't even get that. You just saw something in the corner. Not that I'm saying that's a better version of the film by any means, but but yeah, that scene is really eerie, and he's kind of walking through the ship and getting the
it's
condensation drip onto
condensation.
his
Yeah.
face,
It's
and you're
very
kind of
very
going, "Is
tense
that
sound.
okay? Like, is that going to melt his face or something?" But
You're already scared because you don't. It feels a vulnerable position, and the fact that you're spending so much time there, you feel you don't want to be here. Just get back with the others because it's almost from any corner because it's changed shape. It's first
mm,
was an
mm.
egg, then a facehugger, then a chest burster, and you still don't know. I think we haven't seen well, we haven't seen it in this form yet, and we barely do on the widescreen version. It's in the back, but it's blurred out, as you say, and it's you're. I was surprised looking back how much you do see, but it is focused on the actor and the cat, and it's I think there's a lot more to that scene, apparently a bit more fun and maybe he's taken up. But I think looking in the edit, he cut it even more, so you don't see as much.
Yeah,
Which is a wise
yes.
a
I
wise move for the overall
I think
film.
that's longer in the extent, the extended cut that isn't extended, the director's cut,
Mm.
which isn't the director's cut. Um, but that actually after he's pulled up in out of view, Ripley and Parker run in. I don't think that's in
Run
the
in,
proper
yeah.
version, and also it's sort of like it feels a little bit too convenient. It doesn't need it. I think that it's literally just trying to find slightly alternative versions of things. But I think at this point, Brett's sort of the guy that you probably like the most. He seems like he's a little bit older. He's the kind of um, almost a comic relief character. He sort of has this thing where he just keeps going, "Yeah, right, yeah, right." Um,
Yeah.
and he's kind of like, I think because you feel really warm to him at that point. Yeah, it's he's walking into peril and he's on his own.
Yeah, it's
Um,
kind of that. He's almost like a damsel in distress, where you think, he's almost. Well, he's given the most best dialogue out of everyone, I think. But again, it's credit to those character actors that because he's having dialogue with, as you say, with Parker, with Parker. So you don't want to see any of them. You're so connected to all that crew, even though the character and all that, they've all so well. It's so natural the fit with everyone. They don't seem that strange to you, even though it hasn't been that much screen time with it. So, but that's obviously yeah. So that's Brett's demise, and I think that's the first killer from the alien himself, and then
the
afterwards, as you
first
said,
kill
we
from the outside rather than the inside, isn't
from
it?
the
So yeah,
outside,
that's
from the
the
inside. Yes. Uh,
and yeah, the idea as well that it kind of has this protracting mouth as well is the first time we sort
yeah,
of
we
see
see the
that,
jaws. I
and
guess.
just the
Yeah,
sort of the agility and the strength of it that it's able to pull a person
a
up
man.
into
Yeah, all the way
the
up
top
there.
of the thing,
It's
and that it's
it.
sort of operating. There's this thing that Russell T Davies says when he was writing Doctor Who about it's always more interesting to go up and down than left to right in terms of action scenes. And I think
Hmm.
once you realise if this thing had run on from the left and dragged him off to the right, that wouldn't be as scary. The fact that it comes down from above and then goes up again, you kind of it just makes you sort of think of spiders and things, doesn't it? It's sort of like,
All
okay, it's
the
up there
chains and
now.
everything,
How the
like a
hell are we
web.
going to get up there with the chains and actually that shot that you have after Brett's got the water on his face gives you that sense of just how high that up that
Yeah.
is. It seems to sort of go on forever. It almost looks like there's daylight up there, doesn't
You
it?
almost like it's
And
daylight.
it
Or
really
where's the
makes you
rain? It's like rain almost. So where's that
rain
coming
on the ship. But it's really good for sort of unnerving you again and just sort of thinking, well, how the hell are they going to get up there to get this thing? You
it's
know,
a
um,
it's a beautiful set, I must say. When I'm watching it,
it's
as in
amazing.
recently for this retrospective, even when you're going into that scene and the doors open, Brett's walking through. It's almost I was thinking, I was was this some of this used into Blade Runner afterwards? Because it's just basically it's a metal ship. It's there's so much detail. It looks beautiful. It looks visually a feast for the eyes. Every single frame for this. I think only maybe surpassed a bit maybe by Blade Runner, but honestly I can't even compare them. But it is
Well, I think
it's a
as well,
beautiful
there's a
ship.
different, there's a lot of. I saw something where they were talking about like the blacks and things in this film. That obviously, I mean, that's a staple of horror anyway to keep things dark. Um,
Yeah.
but the alien itself, apparently, the original prototype suit was translucent. So,
I think the head was certainly. I think that's what originally what H.R. Geiger wanted, and he was just trying to working with these materials. I think because he stepped up to be costume sculptor. I mean, originally he was just really there to design, but then he was. I think Ridley said, "Oh, there was a lot of frustration, as in you're not doing my designs how I want to, and I want it complete control." And he'd had obviously, I think, training in industrial design. So it was, I think, yes, he wanted it translated to say, but just couldn't quite get there. But
I
um,
think as well, there might have been an issue with seeing the actor underneath and things. But I think that,
yes, yeah,
I mean, it could have worked. But the idea of having, um, or just sort of stripped out color, really, not having an alien that's blue or red,
well,
that looks wonderful and might sell action figures. They wanted something that kind of just sort of jarred and felt quite
well,
scary. And I
you've
think
got
that
this
works in the design.
unescapable, you know, phallic head there. I mean, if the fact that they run through this whole, subconscious level for almost on every stage of the design, from the egg, from the face hugger, an appendage, inserting into its victim, and the head itself is just this huge phallic thing, and it is. I think it adds so much on a subconscious level to what this. It's as far away you can get from a man in a suit, but it is a man in a suit. Um, at the end of the
I
day,
think it was a basketball player, wasn't it? The guy who
I think
played
he was an
the
actor. He was
alien is
actually a young art student.
okay.
That Ridley saw who's 7 foot, who Ridley saw in a pub, and he said, "Who? Hello there. You're perfect." And he was, yeah, he was an actor and art student, and he was on his, I think, a year away in England at the time. So, and he was quite excited to be part of it. But yeah, he 7 foot, he boulder.
Balaji
I can't remember his name.
Badejo was the alien,
Yes,
26
and
year old
he
design student.
7 foot. So someone, as far as away from a normal height as you can. But again, it is just someone in a suit, but it is
But it
as
was
far
that
as away as
idea as well of trying to get someone with a very unusual body type
yes,
that would
certainly.
once you put this costume on, it's going to bulk it. So that if you get someone who's very, very tall and skinny, then that starts to sort of create people are less aware of it being a person in a suit because they're
Yeah.
already like, "Oh, I don't know too many, almost 7 foot guys who are really, really skinny. But if you can find somebody of that unique body type to do that,
I think the same kind of problem they had in Predator, obviously years later, but luckily they found Peter Kevin Hall in that. So yeah, but
yes, yeah. And
it's
I was thinking as well of obviously of RoboCop that as I always do, but Peter Weller was of a certain body type for that to make that work. There is a miserable fact. Can I just say a miserable fact? No, I
yes,
don't know,
miserable fact.
but
Go on.
I think only three people on the Nostromo are still alive in real life. So unfortunately, all of the people, including the guy who played the alien, and
Oh, really?
the few
Ian
cats that
Holm, I
sadly played
think.
Jonesy, and I think the only people who
Jonesy,
are still
probably.
alive, Tom Skerritt. Well, I mean, they could be 55, but I very much
I
doubt
think
it.
recently
Um,
that's maybe a recent, but yeah, you may be right.
I think Ian Holm died recently, and John Hurt.
Oh,
But I think it's Lambert, Ripley, and Dallas are the only people remaining.
mm,
Sadly, yeah.
it's but
But it's a
yeah,
45-year-old film now. This is the thing. But
yeah.
it's
This is it. The
amazing that
fact
it
that
looks so fresh, and obviously Ridley's still with us.
and the fact that it spawned so many sequels. you've got
Well,
something
and I mean,
very
there was a
different.
long time. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how much into the legacy stuff you were influence sort of stuff, but it wasn't. Empire was 3 years after Star Wars, wasn't it? But Aliens, there wasn't even really talk of doing Aliens for many years, and it was sort
No,
of so
no,
it ended up being 7 years after, which is the
yeah.
same gap between Terminator 1 and 2 as well. Um, and I think Cameron at that point had what had he done? Piranha 2. Oh well, he'd done the
Piranha,
Terminator,
the
but it hadn't
Terminator.
even.
Yeah.
I think the thing that was controversial in the UK as they were filming Aliens is the Terminator still hadn't actually come out in the UK, and it hadn't been a
Oh,
hit. So because there was quite a run time of it, although it was released in '84 in America, it wasn't released until '85 in the UK.
right.
Um,
Okay.
and
So
people thought,
yeah,
well, who's this? Who's this new director? I mean, it's funny thinking that now that Ridley was. I say Ridley like I know him, but Ridley Scott was at the start of his career when he did Alien, and
yeah.
nobody thought, oh well, this is the same situation. It's a new director, but a very different take, obviously, Aliens. But
Well, I
yeah,
think he was under a lot of pressure from the studios, as in they were kind of, well, can you actually take this? Can you actually handle this? And yeah, it was early in his career, and he was under a tremendous amount of pressure. They weren't used to a director who's spending a lot of time getting that perfect shot. Like I said, he's very much a visualist, and he just pays off later on. I think once they saw the dailies, that's when they said, okay, we'll give you more money, we'll give you a bit more time. Credit to his craftsmanship for that. But yeah, he was under a lot of pressure as well, even for any new director. Everyone gets nervous when they're spending a lot of money on something. But as in, yeah, as legacy, yeah, well, like we mentioned before, we had a front and center towards the end. Sigourney Weaver become a breakout star, and someone who's basically could take well, of course, went on to have the franchise on the shoulders, but I think it's very strange. The legacy of it is it's. I think it's only with Aliens, which kind of like it blew up more because, like you said before, it's a different type of dialogue. It's more clippy. It's more almost. That's where you get the kind of the sayings that everyone shouts at each other from that film, but not from this one because the dialogue seems so natural that you're not going to really put on a print on a t-shirt. Let's talk
yes,
about
it's not.
pay.
So get away from her, you bitch, or something like that from
Yeah,
the
yeah.
second one.
One of the
It's
those
not got
classic
that type of
lines.
dialogue.
Those
Yeah.
classic lines.
Well, with Dallas and Ripley, that I think this is probably one of the things you might be getting at with the backstory, but the idea, I think both Tom Skerritt and Sigourney Weaver knew that they were in a relationship. The characters, to be clear, so Dallas and Ripley are meant to be in a
In a kind of
relationship,
relationship. Yeah.
but that is not stated.
No,
You know,
I think it's
it's
one of
not
those.
stated that they are, but it's they were sort of told, look, this is part of the thing. You are sleeping together, but it's not kind of
I
spoken of,
think
just to give them a
on
bit of tension, particularly in that scene, because she has a scene with Dallas, doesn't she, where it's just the two of them, and
yeah
she's saying about whether she should have let Kane back on the
came back.
ship or not, and there's sort of a long argument there. Also, it's not really an argument, but it's a discussion. You sort of get, yeah, he's maybe talking to him in a way that someone who's junior wouldn't, and that's probably because
Yeah,
they've got an equal footing in a personal relationship.
I kept thinking there must be I might have seen this scene, a cut scene, because there was this great 5 disc collection, maybe on Blu-ray, maybe a few years ago, maybe in time
Yeah.
of Portugal, maybe before that, and it might have had a scene between them. But also, I think there's another scene between Sigourney Weaver, Veronica Cartwright's Lambert character, and Sigourney Weaver, where they have a suspicion about Ash, and then she asks him, "Have you ever, slept with Ash on the flight,
Oh
on the
yeah,
hotel
yeah.
before?"
I've seen that scene.
And she
Yeah.
says, "No, are we crazy?" And then because she's trying to kind of find out who's Ash really working for, and he suddenly just came on the ship and all that. And so I think there's a lot of backstory there, as in on a long flight, it's kind of a bit more open relationship with crew, I guess. But
It's
yeah,
weird with things like that because actually that would give you more information, but maybe that's why that stuff would get cut as well. I always thought it was just they wanted to go less into their personal lives. It's sort of like sometimes if you're doing a workplace drama, a lot of workplaces aren't full of people talking about their lives. They're just full of people doing the job. Um, it's
it's
that
very
different. You get certain police dramas where it's more about their personal lives, and you get police dramas where it's just very police procedural. And this is kind of like sort of alien ship procedural, isn't it? We're just getting that world. But also, when you give that information, you're taking away a little bit of maybe the speculation for the audience. So if the audience are wondering some of those things, to spell them out and sort of say, no, this isn't happening, gives you more of a footing of knowing where you are, which is maybe what you don't want to do with a horror. You want to keep people on their toes and not quite knowing where the next curveball is going
well.
to come
I
from.
think it's the fact that it is not though an office drama as much as they've given a lot of the groundwork with it. It's supposed to be a lean, tense slasher movie, and I think there was it's about 3 hours, 4 hours. I think he had a first cut, and they said it's actually doing harm to the tension of the movie, and that you have to cut this down. You have to make it much more leaner, and I think so. He kind of cut in, and I think the theatrical cut is perfect. Quite honestly, I've never.
Oh, it is. Yeah, that's why it makes me laugh that as a director's cut, which even Ridley Scott says isn't his preferred version. I mean, obviously, it's not an office drama, but in terms of it being a workplace thing, I think it's just that grounding thing that it makes you believe in those characters, and then it's all the more terrifying when they do get picked off because there are a lot of slasher films I can think of where you're almost bored and you want the killer to kill because you're so bored of these characters. You just want to
Yeah,
see them, and and as much as I tell myself, oh well, these films are kind of fun, they're not memorable. Because once those people are killed and you in the film and you don't care about them, it doesn't matter to you anymore. But the fact you kind of feel the same terror that these people do, and it's as much about the relationships between the individuals, I think, as it is about the individuals. So it's that thing of if you've got really good actors on their own, that's fine. But if they haven't got any chemistry with each other, that doesn't mean anything. And I think here you've got each of those 7 kills in this you remember. Whereas there's a lot of films, like say even Aliens, there's some of the characters who I couldn't tell you how they die, and sometimes it's deliberate because it's off screen. But on here, every one is like a major point. Every one is like a loss where you go, oh my god, what happens now? Because we're down to you're always aware of how many people are left. Um, and then you get to the point where it is Sigourney Weaver as like a classic final girl. I don't even know where the term final girl come from. Obviously, like you've got Texas Chainsaw like years before, haven't you, and stuff. But
yeah. I mean, she's. I mean, yeah. Of course, like you mentioned before, Ridley screened Texas Chainsaw Massacre to them, and that is, again, very much such a grounded. Strangely enough, you've got long scenes where she's just around the table and she's terrified. You're spending a lot of time with her, but it is a lot of. There's not as much gore as you think in Texas Chainsaw, apparently. Oh, and I did say after many many years. So I can
oh,
see
in
what
Texas Chainsaw there isn't. No, no.
no, but it
There's
is
hardly any. Apparently, the director genuinely wanted a PG rating. He said there's no gore in it.
but
And it's
it's
like
one of the
it
most
isn't.
tense. But it
It's
got
yeah.
those almost the moniker of video nasty back in the day, as in it's should be on the top shelf, and
Well,
that's why you used to have the certificate. But because
I
it's one of
went
the
to
most
see.
tense viewing experiences that you have.
Yeah, I went to see. This is a minor diversion, but it does tie into what we're talking about. I went to see Book of Clarence last night, and there is a crucifixion scene in it, and I was thinking about the Mel Gibson Passion of the Christ, where
Mm,
you see everything,
yeah,
and it feels a lot worse the way it's done in Book of Clarence because you know what's happening, and that is sometimes worse than seeing it. And I think, I mean, I keep hearing mixed things about it. They always say with Jaws, like you don't see the shark much because they weren't overly impressed with with the budget they had and stuff. With Alien, you sort of sometimes hear that, but you go, well, this did have a big budget. I think
That's
maybe
the
that
thing.
they would.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much of it was more a creative realization that the more you put it on screen, the less scary it's going to
I
be.
think
And
Ridley realized that when he was cutting it together, because this is, like I said, it is a beautiful production here. It's design. It's it's fascinating to watch, and you think, well, I want that on the screen as much as possible. I want the money on there, but I
mm,
think it came out in the editing where you wouldn't be scared otherwise. When you start just long shots, thinking, oh, it's. I think there's even a scene where before, of course, Lambert and Parker, they're trying to make the escape, and they're being hunted down, and you see the actual alien sitting down and doing almost like a little crab, little walk, anything. It just spoils the illusion almost
yeah,
instantly. And I think you kind of realize you do not want to be seeing this in a full shot at any point, maybe towards the end, maybe, but then
yeah.
when the movie's ended, but not until then. I think it's
And also
you'd
keeping
almost
something back, I suppose, to that
yeah,
moment,
to
see
the
at the
final
end. Yeah,
reveal. Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, but I think it's where it stays in your mind, and people are more terrified about what they haven't seen than what they have seen. And
I think as well, it because it's such a complex sort of design, and it's sort of like got these um sort
mandibles,
of
or
biomechanical kind of look
yeah,
to it, but also like natural looks to it. The first time you watch it, you're really trying to remember what you saw when you have those glimpses. So you're kind of like, and that adds to that thing of like John Hurt looking into the egg. I want to look at that, but I'm kind of terrified for it to turn up. You know,
yes, you're
particularly in
terrified.
The Dallas scene, which is really, I mean, like I say, they're all memorable, but the Dallas scene. Now I do always remember where it comes from, but he's in multiple like bits of that section looking into blackness, and you're thinking, where is it going to appear from? It's coming from some direction, but I'm
Yeah,
not sure when it's going to turn up. And then when it does, it's literally like 2 seconds of it
yeah,
straight in your
absolutely.
face, and then it cuts to this sort of white noise, which
Yeah,
is really eerie, you know. And you've
we've
got
got this.
this, it's got this sort of weird noise to it as well, the alien, isn't it? Like
I
almost
assume
like
it was a
an
shriek.
elephant
It's
type
like a
noise,
shriek, and
elephant
then
shriek.
but then
Yeah,
I'm thinking, is it that, or is that the scanner that is the alarm that's going off?
yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
you don't know, it's a mixture. I mean, it's always meant to be a very biomechanical, very mechanical, as well as a blending. Had this concept of it camouflaging with its environment, so it would always change shape. But and
Yeah.
I mean, it has a great life cycle. But I think in one of the deleted scenes, you actually catch up with Dallas later on, and with
Well,
Parker in a kind of like a cocoon.
so this is the biggest change. I think this scene was available on. There was a box set actually. I
Yeah.
used to see in Blockbuster. They had the videos from this really expensive Alien trilogy box set, and it had like hours of maybe not hours, but like an hour of special features afterwards. Which at the time, this is before DVDs, that was kind of unheard of. That you had an interview with James Cameron, I think was on the Alien one, but it had quite a lot of stuff. And there was some deleted scenes from Alien, including this thing which I'd read in books at the time. Of there's another scene with Dallas after uh, Brett and Lambert are killed, that she actually encounters Dallas and he's being cocooned. And the life cycle in the original Alien film, as it stands, before that's changed in the Aliens film that comes 7 years later, is that the alien cocoons its victims and they turn into the egg, which then that is the life cycle. So she comes across Dallas, and he is sort of Brett has already been cocooned, and he's sort of starting to change, but it is still the actor, you know, strapped in, and he begs for Ripley to kill him, which she does, and she incinerates him with her flamethrower. I think they said the reason for cutting that originally was for pacing, that they kind of felt that to then have that and then go back to her running around the spaceship, it kind of threw you out of the sort of momentum that they were trying to build. And it's quite I really respect that, because you think now, like if that was Tarantino or someone, they go, "I'm not cutting that," because we've done, you know, we spent time and money on it, and it's the lead actor, and we've done. But to actually go, yeah, do you know what? It's better without it. Um, and it's interesting to watch it, but it did. I remember watching it for the first time and thinking, "Oh my god, I've seen this holy grail of cut scenes," and you go, "Yeah, it's not." It is interesting to watch. It's interesting to see it put back into the film as well, but
It
it
was
probably
always
works
talked
better
about.
without it.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
in the
it works better.
magazines, yeah, it was all talked about, but you can see why they never really, almost reluctantly released it when I guess when you're trying to sell the other Blu-rays and
I
DVDs,
mean,
like,
if it,
oh,
I think
you
it's
think,
if it's the deleted scenes. I mean, so the special edition of Aliens, if I'm not mistaken, is Cameron's preferred cut. So that is a director's cut,
mm,
if that's his preferred cut.
fair enough.
But for a few years, you could only get the extended version of Terminator 2, and there's an even longer extended version, but there was a longer version of T2. Um, and when it come out on DVD, that was the first version. And when you listen to the director's commentary, he was literally saying, "We didn't like this scene, so we took it out." And you go, "Well, why is it back in then? What on the only version I can watch?" Because and they're going, "Oh, well, this slows the story down, or it's too silly, so we took this bit out." Um, so those things, I think, yeah, editing's really important in terms of whether you're cutting a film or even when you're writing, I think, isn't it? It's not just, oh, I've written it, so it must stay in, because it might not be the right thing, or it might just work a little bit better without it.
But
That's the thing, isn't it?
I think pacing issues have changed over the years where you want it under maybe 2 hours back, especially there when you're trying in a cinema environment, trying to get as many showings per time. That studio pressure, but also, I mean, the director. Well, look, he was in the front and center of in the actual cut, and I think it's just a lean, perfect, almost film.
It's
Almost
all
like
one
the
of those
machine.
things where you can't imagine. I think when you watch it, you can't really imagine another scene coming after each one.
No,
That's the thing, because it's not always about, like, pacing and length aren't always the same things, and it's kind of it just needs to be the right shape almost of
moments, the
story. And I
shape.
think
Yeah, exactly.
once you have that thing with Dallas, it suddenly pulled the film into a different shape,
Yeah.
and you go, no, it felt like it was going this way. Now we've gone off in this direction, but then we're going to get whiplashed back into the other direction. It's just a survival story by the
Yeah.
end, isn't it? And I think
Yeah.
that's the more I think about it, and the more sequels come out, I think that's what is brilliant about it. Is it's not trying to tell. We said this before, but I think sometimes writers now don't think about the story that they shouldn't be telling. Now, if you've got a 10-part Netflix series, it doesn't matter, because you can put as much different story and go, you've got 10 hours to fill. But if you've got a film, you're still trying to think of, like, where is this? What is this story, and what isn't this story? And this story is just a survival thing. It's not trying to set up a ton of other stuff. Incidentally, it does have unanswered questions, which I think leads to why part of the reason why Aliens is so good, because James Cameron looked at, right, what hasn't been explored, and now let's do that, and kind of close it off as well, because really almost Aliens is the end of the story, but then they wanted to do more, and they continue to want to do more, and I keep going to watch more as well. But I
It
think that the
is.
reason the original works is because it is just that very stripped down survival story, and I think you know what, we've all got that primal feeling, haven't we? Of, like, even though this is fantastical, I would want to get out of there. So I get what these people are trying to achieve here. It's not trying to explain a really complex heist story or some really, you know, thing where there's a lot of exposition to explain what's going on. These people are trying to stay alive, and this thing wants to eat them.
It
I'm there already. It's like I know I know what to feel in this situation.
it's 'cause it does remind me watching it another film that kind of like had the same shape and probably has the same what was these crossovers up. So it was the original Predator in 1987. Again, you think it's one. It starts out as an action drama, but it turns out into a survivalist, as in almost a slasher movie, almost same shape, very lean. The more you explore the world, the more that would fall apart almost. I mean, the sequels go here and there, but that central film is the beginning, middle, and end of that perfectly shaped movie, which this is. I've got to mention the music in this as well. I think this adds so much to it. I think it's Jerry Goldsmith does the score to this. It adds almost, it's a great orchestral, very almost like 2001, but then it goes into very lyrical, and You got the mood, a huge mood. I think music in this adds so much to its grandness to it, and I've got the soundtrack, but it is just great to listen to. A
It's a
mixture of
really good. It's
traditional
one
and
of those
modern.
scores that I remember James Cameron saying, "Oh, that he didn't really." I hate when I'm relying on my memory, but I'm sure I read somewhere, so it doesn't even mean that it's true, that he wasn't a fan of the score for the original movie. And certainly the Aliens score is very, very memorable. I've got that on vinyl actually, and that the escape from LV-426 Bishop countdown bit at the end got used on every trailer during the
Mm.
90s, including from Dusk Till Dawn that we were talking about earlier. Um, but I think when this is a really good score in that it's not got a memorable theme like
No,
the RoboCop
no,
march or the Terminator theme, but it really, you can't imagine this film working without that
yeah,
score. There's these little sort of like little flourishes where it's almost like it feels like it could be a background noise
yeah,
almost rather than the music. It's sort of like John Carpenter said that about Halloween as well, that he showed it to someone without the music and they said it's not scary, and as soon as the
yeah.
score was put on top of it, everyone went, oh my god, that's terrifying. And this film, that the music is sort of happy to sit in the background, it doesn't take over, but you still couldn't imagine the film without it.
It.
And
I
I've
think it
never really
adds.
thought about that before. I've always
It
kind of gone, "Ah, it's not as good as the Alien score," but you're right.
Well,
It's
it
it's kind
adds
of an
so
understated
much to
masterpiece.
the atmosphere. It's actually filling in so much of the atmosphere. Something you don't
Mm.
see. The alien world. I mean, with the space jockey, it's an alien kind of tribal kind of like score, kind of like those instruments, very very bare. And then I, I think it's almost the soundtrack to the internal organs, and it's all
Mm.
across, or even the most violent scenes. It is, in the chest burst scene. It
Yeah,
is.
you sort of get
It
this
it it,
heartbeat
it
over
is
the
there.
top of the
Yeah.
Kane scene, don't you? Yeah,
I think that score basically serves as that the kind of like element of the atmosphere to this film, and it serves it so well that you don't even notice it. Think, well, oh yeah,
mm,
and there's no theme. I mean, I kind of find that when people try to compare the Alien to Alien, and you can't. It's like you comparing a fork to a spoon or a knife.
yeah.
They have perfectly shaped for their function, but it's a totally different function for that other thing. Aliens, I love obviously, but you appreciate what this is. It's like you lose a bit of that is a basically a great action war movie.
Yeah.
This is basically a great. I can't even
I
say
can't,
it's just a horror movie. It is something more to it. It's
I can't really think of another IP where it's almost like two IPs in one, because
yeah,
now Marvel have the license and they release Alien comics and they release Aliens comics.
oh
And
yeah,
if you see that Alien logo, which is kind of just the old, it's one of the basic fonts, I think, on
yeah, basic,
on
basic.
on on Word. But if you see that, you know what you're getting. You're getting a sort of a horror thing, and if you see
Yeah,
Aliens, you're getting like this action
yeah.
sort of thing, and it's going to be Marines, and it's going to be these other things, and the same with the video games as well. That you kind of know, like these are almost like two franchises as part of one, and then you've got Prometheus as well involved in it in the
Well,
background.
I
Not
think
not,
that's probably a
but
different.
it's
That's
sort of,
almost, yeah. It's not even all right.
it's not
That's
even,
more an
yeah.
explorer, it's kind of like a science fiction
And then
explorers
obviously you've
fantasy.
got Alien versus Predator, which
Well, of
but
course. Well, when you
yeah.
have two IPs, they're twice as good as the individual. Surely, what could go wrong? That
I mean,
well,
Predator that you touched on earlier. I mean, I love Predator, but
yeah,
I always sort of thought, oh, this is an Alien ripoff, but I don't care. And sometimes when I've said that to people,
yeah,
people don't really like that. But I've always just thought it's Alien in the jungle, and that's fine, And it's a really good design, and it was kind of playing on, Arnie was doing all these massive action films, and suddenly it's like,
yeah.
what if Alien, there was an Arnie film and then an Alien turned up, and it's like, well, yeah, why not? But
I,
it's I mean, it's a similar kind of idea, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
you've got maybe less of that thing of a sort of very distinct cast that you've got in this. I mean, they are still their own characters. You still know when everybody gets picked up, but it's very much sticking to that template. It come out like a year after Aliens as well, didn't it?
So it
Predator.
was
So it was probably on
87. Yeah,
people's
yeah, that's
minds.
after yeah,
Um,
86 was Aliens and 87 Predator, I think, yeah.
and actually, I mean, I will just say this. I know, there's a lot of Zack Snyder films that I don't like, but Army of the Dead that come out sort of a couple of years ago on Netflix. I mean, it's a remake of Aliens, and I don't mean that as a diss at all. I
No,
really enjoyed
no.
watching it. I mean, almost to the point that there is a character that is Vasquez in it.
Mm.
But it's got its own design. But I did watch that and think Zack Snyder understands what made Aliens work, and he's kind of done his
Yeah.
own version
Mm.
of it. In the way that I think John McTiernan did with Predator. He sort of did his own version, but probably put more of a twist on it than that. But than Army of the Dead did, but they're really good films. I mean, Aliens is one of those things where I saw that there used to be a clip on one of those videos of James Cameron, this sort of little interview with him, and it's just him and a journalist sat down. It feels like he doesn't even know it's being recorded, but he says that he wanted everything in Aliens to function if you hadn't seen the first movie. So he wanted everything. You
Mm.
could just watch Aliens without watching the first one. And I think you can. I would recommend everyone watches Alien because it's brilliant. But if you watch Aliens on its own, it makes sense completely from start to finish.
But
Everything
it
that Sigourney Weaver's
is,
character's gone through is explicit at the start.
but I would say they're completely different genres. I mean, one is a
They are
horror, one
they
is
are.
action.
Yeah, they
It's
are.
amazing.
Yeah. It is and the idea of that there's a big similarity, I think, between Aliens and Terminator 2, that the first films in both of those are horrors.
Yeah.
The second ones are these things on, where they've turned it on, but probably because they've got a bigger budget as well, so they can afford to do it as a big action thing. Um, but
Well,
yeah, but also both of those films end with a lot of questions. So but in both Alien and Terminator, the final girl gets away. She survived, but she's living with the nightmares of what's come before. I mean, in actual fact, as I say this, I kind of start talking myself out of Terminator 2 being quite as good because in a way it's a repeat of what he's done with Aliens. But it's this
but
idea of going like exploring what's the PTSD of this character and
yeah,
what does this mean now? And that thing is still out there, or the threat of this thing is still out there. What can we say about that now that then brings that back? And also, both of those films draw the story to a close, and they're kind of like end part. So I think if you had a film, if Alien, for example, ended explaining the life cycle of the alien and there was an alien queen and all the rest of it, and don't worry, we're going to send the army out there, you wouldn't be able to have aliens after it because that would have been closed. So there was enough that you could go, okay, what haven't we explored? And also, I think both of those films have started to burn into the public psyche. The sort of public consciousness was everybody had seen Alien by the time Aliens come out. Everybody has seen the Terminator by the time Terminator 2 come out. You can't imagine there being 7 years between um, an original film and a sequel now. I know there's been some delays
well, I
through
mean, they weren't
COVID.
really built written originally for sequel. They were kind of like
No,
film of
they
the
weren't.
sun.
No. Yeah.
That kind of even the Terminator. I think the first one really ends perfectly. It's this perfect circle of a time travel loop.
Everything. Yeah.
Almost.
So, and
That
maybe that took the pressure off and helped with both of those sequels because people could approach them and say, "Well, if this goes wrong, we don't care. We can just pretend it was just the first one." But I think they both bring completely different things to the
I mean,
table.
both those franchises probably James Cameron did both of them. Is they kind of ended after that a great sequel. I mean, Alien
Yeah,
is one of the greatest. It is a by changing the genre or just introducing other elements into it. But since then, you can't really. I think I've had a really great sequel. I would say that holds a canon to the original. Or I mean, the sequels are what they are, but it is without repeating itself, and you can't really. It's not really
that
written or
that's the
designed to do
that's
that.
the thing, though, isn't it? Actually, thinking about it is now you can't imagine that if there was a hit like Alien, if someone said, "Right, we're going to do a war version," although people might like action films, people go, "Yeah, but this film is." is like a horror film set on a spaceship. Don't change it.
Yeah.
I mean, with Aliens as well, it's not called Alien 2, is it? Terminator is called Terminator 2. But here they're kind of going, right, this is going to be different because the last one was one alien and this is a whole
I was going
army,
to
even though we see
say, I mean,
six on screen.
could you, they, where could you really do a sequel to this type of genre of film, this first movie, more close? I mean, with differing, we've got maybe, I think this year we've got the TV series Romulus, I think, which almost seems to be hinting at it's trying to ape the style of this original.
Well, I think
But
there's a film called Romulus coming out, and the TV show on Hulu is next year, apparently, which I've heard them talk about it being things about it being truckers in space. Is it one of the guys who's involved in Chernobyl as well? And I mean, the truckers in space thing is interesting because there's this thing in the film, a recurring thing where they type into the computer into Mother about the crew, and it says the crew are expendable. Which at the time I always thought was crazy as well. I was like, you can't do that with a computer. You've got to give it specific commands back in the day. And now, obviously, with Google, that is what you would do. Um, but the idea that they are expendable because there's this company that just need to get, answers it as to this thing. Um, there is definitely a class thing at play in all three of the original films. And if they can tap into that into the TV show, maybe there'll be something in it. Romulus, I don't know. We will see. As I said recently, I'm hoping that, like with Prey, they might just. I think if they keep it simple, it won't be groundbreaking. I think one of the issues with films like Alien and Terminator, when they do sequels, is because of how groundbreaking the first two films in both of those franchises were. People think, how is this going to be groundbreaking? It won't be groundbreaking because it's 45 years old now. And that isn't a diss either. It's just like it's an observation that it's a 45-year-old franchise. And if you do something completely different, people aren't going to like you for it. So you need to just keep, and I think the key is probably don't change it into a Marvel film. And I think that's why people really liked Prey, whereas The Predator from 2018 by Shane Black was kind of like, what if The Predator was in the MCU? And it didn't work. It didn't work at all. It's far too, there's far too many characters, and it's just the tonally it's jarring. And Prey was really back to basics because it's just a survival thing. And I think particularly the Predator films that have worked are the ones where it's out in the elements more, and it feels like it's just hunters and the hunted. And with Alien, I think if you're doing an Alien film rather than Aliens, you just want it to be a survival thing. So if you've got a crew that you care about and it's claustrophobic, and they start dying, you can just have that as a horror film, and it might work if you know what you're doing. I think as well the thing of not seeing the alien, we are all familiar with the design of it now. I have many NECA alien action figures, so I'm very familiar with the design. But the idea that it can't be scary because you know what it looks like, I don't agree with that. I do agree that you should probably keep it in darkness as much as you can, but you can make a man seem scary in a horror film if you don't see them, even if you know who that actor is. So it's just about, do you care about those characters, and getting some things, maybe playing on expectations of the audience as well, maybe flipping some things that you think of. There were a bunch of shorts that come out for the 40th anniversary as well, which are worth watching. They're probably all on YouTube still, and there was just like 6 short films, and there was one that had I can't remember the name of it now, but there's a dog involved in it, and it was a good little twist on expectations from Alien 3 and other aspects of the genre. And I was just like, oh, that was quite interesting. Maybe there is something more you could do about this. And I think it's, they've got the actor from Rye Lane in this new one as well, so it might work. But I've had enough bad Alien films now that I'm perfectly prepared that this might suck. But I'm trying not to think about it. I will go and watch it when it's out. I will try and watch it maybe a week after it's come out, so I'm not in a packed room, because I remember when I went to see Covenant, I was just sat next to someone who was tutting the whole way through. And I did almost put my fist through his chest, ironically, because like seriously, dude, if you don't want to watch this film, go home. Like, nobody's making it, and it's not that bad. But I mean, the chestburster scene in Covenant, there's problems with Covenant, but I think the idea of having a crew composed of people who are in romantic relationships, so they're all husband and wife couples, works really well because whenever someone
Yeah, it
gets picked
does.
off, you kind of feel the loss of it. It's not just a work colleague.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
but also the build up to the chest burster is really intense in a way it hasn't been since the first one, and you know what's coming, but it's that thing of maybe the suspense is worse than the anxiety of what's about to happen is worse than when it actually happens. I'm sure it's not for the characters, but you can really, by stretching that out, and they really play on it. I remember watching it going, "Oh, this works really well. Why am I getting so? I'm a fan of this. I know exactly what's going to happen. Why am I getting stressed by this?" So, I don't think it's like a classic, but I thought Covenant was quite underrated, and I really did not expect much when I saw the trailer. I thought, "Oh, this looks like a B movie," but I think you just need to. I think the filmmakers need to keep it to basics and not turn it into a Marvel movie, but audiences need to not get their expectations up too high and just
Yeah.
expect it to be a fun horror, because it was unique for its time, but now you're dealing with something that is nearly 50 years old. So the whole sort of thing in 1979, you wouldn't have believed that this stuff could be happening, of seeing this
No.
alien that you've never seen this design before. You've never seen this thing tear out of someone's chest, but it's kind of, it's been done now, hasn't it? So
Yeah.
you're always
I mean,
coming back to it and it's not fresh.
you reminded when it came out, it was the era of some great horrors of that time. I mean, you had
Mm,
The Exorcist, you had The Omen, and all. I
yeah.
mean, very, very truly scary, suspenseful movies that were, almost character-driven pieces. But that's the environment, and that's how it was influenced when it was born. But yeah, I think if we had a bit more reliance on a more of a practical, would you have Craftsman's here? I mean, this was all done in Shepperton Studios back in the day. I was I wouldn't mind if you did a kind of TV movie or a streaming service where you could maybe take some of the budget away and not make
I
it a
think
big
when
grand
yeah, when you're in those
story.
when you're in those sets, particularly at the end, um, with Sigourney Weaver just running around, and you've got
Or in
like
corridors,
a
yeah.
lighting effect, which, I
Mm,
mean, there must be, if it gets played in cinemas for the anniversary, there must be a strobe warning at the start of that
yeah.
now, because even I find that difficult to watch, and I don't suffer from epilepsy, but like that, it's so extreme that the sort of flashing lights, that it does just naturally, I think, put you on edge, being in that, the sirens are going off, the mother voice is saying that the ship is about to explode. um there's an alien at the end of the corridor. Sigourney's sweating, she's trying to get the cat. It's really tense, and I think just that kind of, and it's difficult to remember that scene as well, I find, because there's no dialogue or anything to pin into it. So every time I watch that sequence at the end, it's almost like fresh, because it's just so
I think
so
it forms
intense, I
such
think.
great part of the trailer. Actually, I think there's a lot more heartbeat going on underneath it. I think the trailer even seemed very unnerving. I think it's more
It's
prevalent
such a
in the
good.
trailer for that film.
I listened to there's an episode of I think it's called Screenshot on Radio
Mm,
4, and they were talking about trailers, um and what the best trailers are, and I thought it's always a subject that's interested me, because there are good trailers I've seen this year, very good trailers for very good films, very good trailers for very bad films, and bad trailers for very good films. Um, but it was interesting on that because they spoke to a lot of filmmakers and a lot of audience people, and so many people said, when put on the spot, what's one of the best trailers you can think of? So many people said Alien, and there's kind of two versions actually. So there's one which is just the egg, and then it splits, and that's sort of like the teaser, in space no one can
yeah.
hear you scream. There's another one where once the egg splits, which I suppose is the theatrical trailer, you then get shots of the crew going out, and things start spiraling out of control, but they're very quick shots, and there's no dialogue at all in it. There's
No,
just that kind of weird screamy element of the score.
siren or whatever it
That's,
is, and the
yeah, and
score.
and
Yeah.
it it's a really intense watch, even when you've watched the film, just
Yeah.
to watch the trailer. It is like perfect. And you go, I wish more people would put effort like that into the trailers and kind of think of that. I think for me, it's that and Train Spotting, where it was a completely separate scene that isn't in the film. If people did that more often, because it's a
Yeah.
marketing tool, and you want to get people to go and watch your film. And if you can think of you're giving a pitch to the audience for 60
It's like
seconds
a
to make
story
people
hook in
go.
itself. Wow. Okay. Well, I think I've got to say, a has the title of deserved classic in every sense of the word. If you want an example of a classic, I got to say I've put this front and center. It's a film. The fact that we're still talking about it, and it's just, even with its legacy, it was born out of this film. And I think it's a collaboration of many artists that birthed this, quite honestly. And I think Ridley was a very generous in giving the space and time and fighting to get this on screen as well. So it's almost a miracle. From what I heard, it was the hardest shoots ever to do, because I think the amount of pressure to get this done. But as maybe the saying goes, it's absolute perfection in its shape and form, like the creature itself. But yes, if you haven't caught it, I think you not only enjoy it, but you'll be educated by it if you're involved in filmmaking in any aspect. Well, James, thank you for joining me, and for you at home, thank you. Until next time, see you then.
We hope you enjoyed this film and TV review.com episode. Catch the latest film and TV reviews, together with regular episode content from the world of film and TV every week. See you soon. Would you like to reach our film and TV review podcast audience? Do you have a product or service of interest to film and TV home consumers or followers of the entertainment industry? Have a film or show production to publicize? For affordable price plans for all budgets, get in touch and find out about our introductory advertising options. Reach our audience of film and TV viewers and visit our site contact page at filmandtvreview.com, or you can email us at business@filmandtvreview.com. Reach out today.